Chapter 1. Elias Voss woke to the sensation of cold metal beneath his bare back. His wrists ached from the weight of thick, alien restraints, his skin raw where the shackles bit in. The stale, chemical-infused air of Dra'karth Penitentiary burned his throat. A voice, guttural and thick with disdain, pulled him from the haze of unconsciousness. The new human wakes. Elias turned his head. A hulking, insectoid figure loomed over him, its chitinous plates dull under the flickering overhead lights. Behind it, two more aliens, one reptilian, one covered in coarse black fur, watched him with amusement. The reptilian, a Zeltrax, bared its fangs. You should not have survived the transport. Humans break before they even arrive. Elias exhaled sharply, shifting against his bindings. His body was bruised, but nothing felt broken. He met the Zeltrax's slit-pupiled stare with calm defiance. Maybe you got defective chains. A deep growl reverberated through the chamber. The reptilian stepped forward, only to be stopped by another figure entering the room. Warden Karzul. The Zeltrax towered above the rest, his armor a deep, gleaming black, a contrast to the cruel amusement in his yellow eyes. "Welcome to Dra'karth, human," Karzul said, his voice a low purr. "You will not last long here." Elias flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. "You keep saying that. Starting to think you're trying to convince yourselves." The warden's lip curled. He turned to his guards. "Put him in the arena." The restraints unlatched. Before Elias could react, a blunt force struck his gut, knocking the air from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, coughing as armored hands dragged him to his feet. The world tilted. Then, darkness. Elias woke to the deafening roar of an audience. His boots scraped against a blood-stained metal floor. The arena walls stretched high, jagged and rusted, separating him from the thousands of alien spectators above. Their glowing eyes and twisted grins gleamed in the dim, flickering lights. Across the pit, a massive gate groaned open. A beast emerged. Elias inhaled sharply. The creature was a Graxel, a six-limbed nightmare of muscle and exoskeletal plating, its claws like serrated daggers. Thick cables jutted from its neck, restraints that wouldn't hold much longer. Karzul's voice boomed overhead. "This is your first lesson, human." The cables snapped free. The Graxel lunged. Elias dodged, barely escaping the claws meant to tear him apart. The creature's charge sent dust and debris flying as it slammed into the ground where he had just stood. The crowd erupted in laughter. Elias rolled to his feet, calculating. He had no weapons, no armor, just his instincts and training. He circled the beast, studying the way it moved, fast but heavy, its armored head low when it charged. It lunged again. Elias twisted, narrowly avoiding its claws. But this time, he ran toward the Graxel instead of away. The crowd gasped. At the last second, he dropped into a slide beneath the creature's belly, the coarse hide tearing into his shoulders as he passed under. His hands grasped at something, a gap between the plating along its ribs. With a grunt, Elias drove his fingers deep into the exposed flesh and pulled. The Graxel screeched, convulsing violently. Elias gritted his teeth, holding on as the beast thrashed, its tail smashing into the walls. Blood, dark and viscous, spilled onto his hands. Then, a sickening crunch. The creature collapsed. Silence. For the first time since entering the pit, the arena was deathly still. Then, the stands erupted. Half the crowd screamed in outrage, the other half in delighted shock. Elias stood over the corpse, chest heaving. His arms trembled from exhaustion, his body slick with sweat and alien blood. He wiped his hands on his tattered prison tunic and turned his gaze upward, to the warden's private viewing box. Karzul's face was unreadable. Elias tilted his head, smirking. "Lesson over." The warden did not respond. He simply gestured to the guards. Elias barely had time to brace before something struck him hard across the back of the head. The world spun. Darkness. Elias came to in a damp, windowless cell. His wrists were bound again, this time with reinforced restraints. His head pounded from the impact, but he was still alive. A low, raspy voice reached his ears. "You're either very stupid, or very dangerous." Elias turned his head. In the shadows of the cell sat a prisoner unlike the others. Broad-shouldered, his skin lined with the faded markings of an ancient warrior race. His eyes glowed faintly, the color of molten metal. "Call me Horus," the alien said. Elias exhaled, shaking the lingering haze from his mind. "Elias." Horus leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You've made enemies today. The Warden won't tolerate a human defying him." Elias rolled his shoulders against the cold wall. "He'll have to try harder." Horus studied him for a long moment before chuckling, a sound more approving than amused. "Then you might just survive this place after all." Chapter 2. Elias Voss woke to the taste of iron in his mouth. His tongue pressed against a cut on the inside of his cheek. His body ached from the arena fight, but the pain was secondary. He was still alive. That was all that mattered. A dim, pulsing red light flickered from the ceiling, barely illuminating the cramped cell. The walls were damp, the air thick with the stench of sweat and rust. Across from him, Horus sat cross-legged, watching with quiet interest. "You slept longer than I expected." Elias shifted, testing the stiffness in his limbs. "Not exactly luxury accommodations." Horus smirked, though his glowing eyes held no amusement. "Luxury doesn't exist here." He leaned back against the cold wall. "You made an impression yesterday. That's dangerous." Elias rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The prison had no true silence, only the distant hum of machinery, the occasional muffled scream, and the ever-present knowledge that someone, somewhere, was watching. "Karzul wants to break you," Horus continued. "Humans don't last long here. He enjoys watching them crumble." Elias met the alien's gaze. "Then I'll have to disappoint him." Before Horus could respond, a mechanical hiss filled the cell as the reinforced door slid open. A Zeltrax guard stepped inside, his scaled hands gripping a shock baton. "On your feet, human. The Warden requests your presence." Elias smirked. "Must be my lucky day." The baton cracked against his ribs before he could react. Pain shot through his side, sharp and electric. He staggered but refused to fall. The guard clicked his mandibles in irritation and yanked him forward. Horus's voice was calm but edged with warning. "Don't let him into your head." Elias gave a slight nod before he was shoved into the corridor. The walk through Dra'karth was designed to humiliate. Elias was paraded through rusted hallways lined with cells stacked high, the air thick with the reek of unwashed bodies and decay. Prisoners watched from behind reinforced bars, some with interest, others with amusement, a few with pity. A voice slithered through the din. "Dead man walking." Elias didn't react. They wanted to see fear. He refused to give them the satisfaction. The guard led him through a set of towering steel doors into a dimly lit chamber. The room was stark, a single chair bolted to the floor, thick restraints waiting to be locked in place. And behind a cold, reinforced desk sat Warden Karzul. The Zeltrax leaned forward, resting his clawed hands together. His eyes gleamed with something between amusement and hunger. "Sit." Elias stayed where he was. "I'm comfortable, thanks." Karzul chuckled, a low, grating sound. "You don't understand your position, human. You are not defying me. You are entertaining me." The guards behind Elias tensed, but Karzul lifted a hand, stopping them. He gestured toward the empty chair again. "Indulge me." Elias sat. The restraints clamped around his wrists and ankles immediately, locking him in place. He leaned back, unfazed. "You gonna monologue, or are we skipping to the part where you try to break me?" Karzul's grin widened. "So eager." He tapped a control panel on his desk. The walls shifted, revealing massive screens displaying footage of the arena fight. The moment Elias drove his fingers into the Graxel's exposed flesh played on repeat. Karzul observed him carefully. "You should not have won." Elias met his gaze. "And yet, here I am." The Warden leaned forward. "Tell me, human, what do you fear?" The room darkened. A sudden hum filled the air, low and insidious. It vibrated in Elias's bones, a frequency just on the edge of perception, digging into his skull like an invisible needle. His muscles tightened involuntarily. Karzul's voice slithered through the noise. "Every species has a threshold. A breaking point. The hum grew sharper. Shadows twisted at the edges of his vision. A flicker, his father's face, bloodied and broken from an ambush years ago. Another flicker, his squadmates screaming as they were burned alive in an off-world operation gone wrong. Pain lanced through his skull. Elias gritted his teeth and forced his breathing to stay even. Karzul watched, curious. I expected screams. Elias exhaled, voice steady. Must be disappointing. The hum intensified. More phantoms clawed at his mind, ghosts of his past, twisted and amplified. But he'd suffered worse. He'd endured hell before. This was just another battlefield. Elias closed his eyes, focusing. He slowed his heartbeat, pushed past the agony, and pictured something else. The Warden's face when he failed to break him. When he opened his eyes again, he smirked. Is that all you've got? For the first time, Karzul's amusement faded. The hum vanished. Silence settled between them. The Warden studied him with something new, not just irritation, but intrigue. You are different. The restraints clicked open. Elias rolled his wrists as he stood, ignoring the lingering ache in his skull. Karzul exhaled, shaking his head. Very well. Return to your cell. But know this, human. The Warden leaned closer, his voice a dark whisper. I will enjoy watching you fall. Elias smiled. Then you better get comfortable. Back in the cell, Oris watched as Elias sat down, exhaling slowly. He tested you, Oris said. Elias nodded. Mind games. Didn't work. Oris studied him, then gave a slow, approving nod. Good. But that was just the beginning. Elias leaned back against the cold wall. Then I guess we better start planning. Oris's eyes narrowed. Planning for what? Elias looked him in the eye. An escape. For a moment, silence. Then, a grin spread across the alien's scarred face. Now you're speaking my language. Chapter 3. Elias sat in the dim glow of the cell's flickering light, his mind already dissecting the details of their escape. The prison was a fortress of steel and cruelty, but no system was perfect. Every lock had a key. Every warden had a weakness. He just needed to find the cracks. Across from him, Oris observed in silence. The alien's molten eyes flickered with something unreadable, curiosity, perhaps a measure of doubt. You really think escape is possible? Oris finally asked. Elias leaned forward. Everything breaks under enough pressure. Even this place. Oris studied him, then exhaled through his nose. The Warden won't let you live long enough to test that theory. Elias smirked. Then we better move fast. The cell door hissed open before Oris could reply. A pair of guards stood outside, their shock batons humming with restrained energy. Both of you, one growled. Arena duty. Elias and Oris exchanged a glance. No choice but to comply. As they stepped into the corridor, Elias noted every detail. The guard rotation, the surveillance nodes tucked into rusted ceiling panels, the magnetic locks securing the gates. Pieces of a puzzle, slowly forming a path forward. The march through Dra'karth was the same as before, guttural jeers from prisoners, the stink of decay and sweat. But this time, Elias wasn't just observing. He was calculating. The arena was alive with spectacle and bloodlust. Aliens of all species filled the towering stands, their voices a chaotic symphony of cheers and snarls. Spotlights burned down on the pit, where the steel floor still bore the dark stains of previous fights. Karzul stood in his viewing box, ever the orchestrator of suffering. His gaze lingered on Elias, a glint of amusement in his reptilian eyes. Welcome back, human, the Warden's voice boomed. Let's see if your luck holds. A massive gate at the far end groaned open. The creature that emerged this time was no mindless beast. A Glavern mercenary, towering and heavily armored, stepped forward. The alien's thick hide was lined with deep battle scars, and its 4 muscular arms gripped twin serrated blades. A trained killer, sent to make an example of him. Elias cracked his knuckles. About time you sent a real opponent. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. The mercenary wasted no time. It charged, covering the distance in seconds, blades slashing toward Elias in a blur of steel. Elias ducked, barely avoiding the first strike. The second blade followed, nicking his arm as he twisted away. Fast, precise, trained. He needed to end this quickly. The Glavern swung again. This time, Elias moved toward the attack, stepping inside its reach. The blade skimmed past his ribs as he struck, an open-palmed hit to the throat. The mercenary barely flinched. Elias pivoted, driving an elbow into the alien side. The impact was solid, but the Glavern absorbed the blow, retaliating with a brutal backhand. Pain exploded across Elias's jaw. He hit the ground hard, blood pooling in his mouth. Sloppy, Oris muttered from the sidelines. Elias spat blood onto the arena floor. He needed a different approach. The Glavern lunged, aiming for a finishing strike. Elias rolled, narrowly avoiding decapitation, and snatched a loose fragment of metal from the ground. As the mercenary raised its blades for the final blow, Elias drove the shard into the alien's knee joint. A sickening crunch. The Glavern roared in agony, staggering. Elias didn't hesitate. He leapt onto its back, wrapping an arm around its thick neck. The alien thrashed, trying to shake him loose, but Elias held firm, pressing his forearm into its throat, cutting off air. The crowd screamed. The Glavern collapsed. Elias rolled off the twitching body, gasping for breath. Silence. Then, uproar. Half the crowd cheered in triumph. The other half howled in outrage. Karzul's expression darkened. This was not the outcome he had planned. The Warden leaned forward, voice dangerously low. Enough games. The floor beneath Elias shuddered. A panel slid open. Something massive began to rise from below. A new challenger? No. Elias's stomach dropped as he saw what was coming. A disintegration field. Karzul was done playing. The Warden's voice echoed through the arena. There is no rebellion in Dra'karth. Only submission. The energy field crackled, drawing closer. The heat singed Elias's skin. No escape. Until an explosion rocked the arena. A fireball erupted from the upper stands, sending alien spectators screaming as debris rained down. In the chaos, a section of the outer gate blasted open. Elias's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. This was a coordinated attack. A riot. And someone had just given him the perfect opportunity. Elias ran. The prison fell into chaos. Guards scrambled to contain the riot as prisoners surged through broken gates, overpowering their captors. Smoke filled the corridors, the alarms wailing over the sounds of battle. Elias and Oris moved fast, navigating through the carnage. They weren't the only ones seizing the moment. Others had been waiting for this chance, too. A trio of prisoners, a towering Bracca, a wiry Vexery, and a pale-skinned human woman with cybernetic implants, fell into step beside them. "You're Elias?" the woman asked. Elias gave a cautious nod. She tossed him a stolen shock rifle. "Good. You're coming with us." No time for questions. They moved through the burning halls, cutting down guards in their path. The main security gate was already failing, its reinforced plating crumbling under repeated explosions from prisoner-made bombs. As they reached the outer perimeter, Karzul's voice boomed over the intercoms. "No one leaves Dra'karth alive." Elias smirked, slamming a fresh charge into the stolen rifle. "Watch me." The final blast tore through the last gate, revealing the vast, open plains beyond. For the first time since arriving, Elias tasted freedom. But he knew the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning.